So, hello, friends. Maybe you know me as Rabbi 360, but you might also know me as Rabbi Seth Goldstein. And I'm a congregational rabbi here in Olympia, Washington. And here's my friend.
Hello, I am the Rev Riley. I'm the Reverend Elizabeth Riley, an Episcopal priest up north of Seattle. I'm on TikTok and all the things where I met Rabbi Seth, and we've been internet friends for far too long, given how close in proximity we are. So we recently got together and had a lovely lunch that was just delicious. And we made a TikTok, uh, which like getting to actually make a TikTok in real life with a friend and not just like myself in my sanctuary. That that was a treat.
It was a weird experience, right? Which is kind of how I do mine. I don't put anybody else in my TikToks like you do as well. I play all the parts.
It's like that is it share who that audio of I will be playing all the parts.
Oh,
Um
yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. Well done. Well done. That is true.
Yeah,
That
I've
is true.
done a couple collabs with other creators and I'm like, "Oh, how do you do video?" Like it's a little awkward trying to figure out how to film with another creator. But it's fun. The internet likes it.
Yeah, the internet likes it. It was fun. We posted it. It was great. I mean, it is surreal kind of meeting people IRL, as they say, when you just know somebody um from online. And yeah, I just thought like because I'd followed you for a while and just really appreciated your content and your work and that you've turned into a book now. So there I did a plug for you. So the yeah, so that was really fun, especially since as we realized we live quite close. A
Which is
hop, skip, and a jump.
well, and in the Pacific Northwest, you sort of have to cling to any progressive religious buddies that you can find because there's so few of us. Uh,
I think we're fighting more against the unaffiliated than anything else. So yeah.
yeah. Um, so this video we did, I find it so interesting. Like it's a pretty innocuous video, right? It's I'm a progressive priest, you're a progressive rabbi. We both want to do interfaith work. Like nothing, I've done much more controversial videos than that. And I know I was surprised with the negative feedback we got, at least when it hit the trolls of Instagram in particular. Were you surprised by the negative feedback, or was it like, no, this is par for the course?
No, it was interesting because I felt like I was given an invitation into a different arena of negative content, which was really interesting because I'm used to my trolls. Like,
So what
have,
are your trolls like?
well, my trolls vary. My trolls kind of fall into two categories, and one is kind of taking over. My trolls are first, it would be initially content I would make, and most of my is spiritual content, Torah, holidays, whatnot. There would be comments about Israel, Palestine, and I say that as a troll sense, like no, obviously it's an important issue, and it's something that we need to be engaged with, and I am engaged with. But just kind of lobbing things like that,
When the video had
and
nothing
not
to
they're
do with
not thoughtful comments. They're just like, what about this? What about it?
that.
Like, or just free Palestine. And it's like it's sort of okay, that's out of place. You're just trying to get a rise
Mhm.
out of something, and it's not contributing to dialogue. And so that's my one set of trolls. And then the second set of trolls, which we're getting actually more frequently, is the and I think this is I saw this in that related to you, which is like, oh, you're not a real rabbi, or as a progressive, both politically and also theologically and spiritually, um, that I was not a real rabbi. I was misrepresenting Judaism. I was not a follower of Torah. I was not, I was subverting Torah. Um, I'm just, a pretender type thing. So that was kind of the where it comes up mostly.
Uh,
And so your trolls were, I guess, about not a real priest type
Right.
thing.
So I definitely have like the heretic bros, like the folks who are just going to come after me as full on heretics. So those are going to be the folks who are self-proclaimed Christians. And there's a few different flavors, right? Like there's going to be people who claim Catholicism. And I say that because like I have amazing Catholic colleagues and like Catholic scholars are some of like the best theologians. I've studied with them, and so like I have great collegial relationships with many Catholics I meet. I've internet people who claim they're Catholic who just say some of the most vile things. And it's,
Mm.
you know, whether or not that's just like a 12-year-old boy like behind a screen name or people who I feel like are very out of touch with a lot of the teachings we see coming out of the Vatican. And then there's kind of the evangelical branch who also think I'm heretical, but for different reasons. So there's all sorts of different um, folks who want to come after often my progressiveness, being a woman, being a priest. Um, and then, I get all the non-religious folks who just kind of hate religion. And so I mean, I don't know if you get a ton of those people, but it's sort of this scoffing at religion at all, and I'm sure taking zero time to hear whatever it is I'm actually saying. Um,
That's interesting. Yeah, I don't get those so much, but I can see where it's coming from. And I'm not exactly sure where some of these trolls come from. I mean, someone sent me a comment once. I was sort of complaining. I forgot if I had commented or made a video. I rarely do video responses to comments, and they said that, probably a lot of those comments aren't from other Jews, but they're probably from Christians who have an idea about what a Jew should be. And
mhm.
I thought that was kind of interesting. And it's kind of hard to tell sometimes, although there are little hints now and again that people are not of the community because they might slightly misuse words, like refer to not Reform Judaism, which is the proper term, but Reformed Judaism, which is not a correct term. So it's just kind of interesting. But
See, I'm
there
not
was,
sure I could trust Episcopalians to use the right, because like the whole like Episcopal, Episcopal, Episcopalian, like they all use it incorrectly. But
oh, they do. Okay. I thought you were saying like Episcopalians are like the higher level of troll,
oh
but they know they're trolling because
no, I would never tell if they use the word right or wrong and be like, well, you got it right this time. Excellent. But so, and then
um,
there's another type of troll I do get in some videos that is actually what usually feels like the sort of scariest and most dangerous, which is especially when I'm doing Jewish Christian stuff, the people coming after kind of Judaism or my family's heritage of Judaism, comments about my looks and saying like I am a Jew in hiding
wow.
in Christian collar, like very nasty comments that you're like, this is trying to incite anger and hatred, and so that's a small piece I've gotten just with the topics I've gotten into, and then with our video uh there was some nasty responses. I ended up turning off comments from people we weren't friends with because it got so exhausting.
Yeah, and it was, I guess I was, so the surprise for me in reading those trolls, like I knew that like I said, I have my trolls and I got to see some of your trolls, and I can imagine what you described sort of from evangelicals or non-progressives and also taking issue with you as a woman in that role. I kind of expected that, but I was kind of surprised where there was a bunch of comments that took issue with even the fact that we were engaging, like or talking with each other, that it's not something that should be done. And that took me by surprise, honestly. I hadn't really where's that coming from? Where's that?
So, do you think it's coming from a real place of people actually believing that, or people trying to incite anger on the internet? I mean, I know being in kind of theological circles, it feels like old news. Like interfaith dialogue is very like of the 80s. Like it's been around for a while. And so this doesn't feel particularly radical, but maybe it's just been so quiet for so long for people it feels radical. Is it just that we're regressing into such um conservatism that folks are disturbed by it? I'm equally surprised by that too.
Yeah, I don't know. It was not I understand that more traditional is that the right word? Or evangelical, or conservative, yeah, streams within religions tend to engage less in interfaith dialogue because they don't see the value in it necessarily, or because they're so rooted in their approaches and theologies that there's nothing to talk about. And honestly, I could see that because I tend to not invite conversations with evangelical Christians, for example, because we're just so far. It's just not a dialogue. It's not. Uh, there's no engagement there, as opposed to when I talk with like you and other mainline colleagues and progressive clergy. It's like there's opportunity for some dialogue there. So I guess that could be it. I guess that could be the source of those comments.
Just the trolls being trolls. And some of them, I mean, you missed it because I reported it, but people calling for actual violence against us, which obviously like I blocked and reported.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow, I totally missed that. What
someone said
could I
that
ask?
we should be lynched. Um,
Really?
yeah, which
For what? For
that's all they said. They should be lynched. Instagram did not find it as a violation, though, I don't think.
wow. That is wow. Scary. Oh, I'm glad I didn't see that.
Yeah. And there's a part of me that's like, I don't want to be on the internet if this is what it's going to be, right? Is just this vitriol and ugliness. But there's also
Hmm.
good within the comments, I think. Like there were definitely people supportive and encouraging of seeing this. I don't know, and maybe I wasn't as attuned to it. I don't feel like we got a lot of like Israel Palestine comments on that video. But I also have seen that in probably to a much lesser degree than you, but people who, no matter what I'm saying, who will comment about that.
Yeah. I've seen less of that, and I don't know if it's just because people move on, or also because I've blocked certain words from appearing because they're just.
You've trained the
Uh,
algorithm.
but yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I was surprised, but again, I think like majority of the trolls now are kind of attacking. Well, I guess the commonality is that we are misrepresenting our respective faiths, and that um, we're we're charlatans, I guess, at what we do. So
Well, and
very
that
interesting.
was part of our like wanting to get together too, is to get deeper than we can get in a 1 minute video on the difficulties of a nuanced conversation these days about
Right,
Israel or Palestine or just being a religious leader in the political climate of the United States, uh,
right,
and being able to have a nuanced opinion about anything that's more than just a soundbite. Um, because that's all anyone's listening to on TikTok.
right. I mean, we're feeding that, right? Are we? No, just, but yeah, no, you're right. But it is also, but right, that's why we wanted to get together to kind of say, okay, how can we break through that? That's an invitation to, yeah, let's take it. And I think that kind of started because we had some message exchanges, and it was like, oh, let's meet, and then blossomed uh, into this, right? The opportunity to say, okay, here are the sound bites, and here are the ways we connect, and let that be not the end of
Mhm.
the discourse, not for us and not for anybody who's engaging, but the beginning, that it's a way in, uh, and not um, and not like it's an invitation to go. It's like you watch I don't know, I see a lot of uh, videos of like places to visit, right? Especially around where we are in Washington, but that's not travel. That's just like like 100 bookmarks of where I want to go. But it's like the idea is to then go to those places, right? So that hopefully that'll be the same thing where it's like people can connect and then also continue.
I love that.
Thank
But
you. I just thought of that.
um I also, and like from our last conversation, I've been thinking a lot about the risk we both feel in these conversations too. Because there's congregational expectations, there's community expectations, there's just scary people on the internet. I feel like maybe you experience more risk than I do. I mean, some of these topics are hit much closer to home. I get to be a little bit more on the peripheral. And so I don't know, do you feel that? Does it feel risky to talk and to dialogue about the state of the world? Um,
It feels depressing, but no, it is. Yeah, it is. It could be. I mean, I think in the general sense of things are kind of so. I mean, it's kind of cliche to say everything's polarized, but I think everything's polarized, and so it's like the where we do kind of get into our silos and just kind of lob things at each other, and yeah, because it's safe in a way, but also so it's risky to kind of do that and have those conversations. Yeah, I think that some of it is um, maybe different things for each of us that feel riskier. But I think even just the idea of having conversations, I think too, like and going back to thinking about interfaith work, there is a tendency, I think, I think it's important, um, especially at these times when we need to kind of build coalitions and join together in various work. And sometimes that's kind of where it's left, right? That there's all right, where are the commonalities, where are the places we could work together, and there are there are aspects to that work that can be difficult because there's differences, right? So that there's and been thinking a lot about that, about how we draw those lines and where the overlaps, in terms of where there's where we engage with certain things and whatnot. Because when thinking about interfaith work, there are definitely um, aspects of over, like a Venn diagram, right? There are aspects of overlap, but then there's things that are separate. And do those things that are separate get in the way, or do we just put those aside in order to do what we need to do as in the commonalities? And do we need to dip into those outside things? Is that vague enough? I don't know.
oh,
People can read into it if they want.
um, absolutely. I think one of the places interfaith work can fail is trying to make everything mesh together and everything get along and, not allowing things that need to be separate or aren't going to be reconcilable, to not force those. Or at least, I mean, at least for Christian, it's just how we get watered down Christianity with everything. Because that's really how I think Christianity has approached a lot of interfaith work. Like, let's do an interfaith service. And it's just like Jesus under like a couple words. Um, so uh
And
uh
right, and that's interesting. Yeah, that's a great example because I think it's too. It's like, well, what is And that's come up, and so they're like, is there really such a thing as authentic interfaith worship? I mean, I don't necessarily think there is because whatever would come out of that is a comp is unless everybody's compromised, everything would be a compromise. Uh,
Right. And then we start sacrificing what it is that makes each thing really kind of unique and what is usually at the core of a faith tradition. So
right.
when I was doing this work in a congregation, rather than doing an interfaith service, we did worship swaps where my group of Christians went to a Friday night Shabbat service, and a group from the synagogue came to Sunday morning worship services, and then we did talkbacks after to kind of answer questions. And
Mm.
it's fascinating to see like what was really different about our worship and what was like, oh, that felt familiar or whatever it was. And that ended up, I felt like feeling way more fruitful. I do think it took some attention, especially on the Christian side, to say, what are our readings that day? What's our music? Not to make it as welcoming as possible, but to recognize there were going to be parts of a Christian worship service that just weren't going, I wasn't expecting our Jewish visitors to start saying the creed, which is our profession of faith. Uh, so it was an interesting experience. And I feel like something I would want to do again with groups.
That's interesting that you said even in that context that you modified some of the hymn selection or reading selection was tailored.
We can't change the readings. It definitely makes so I'm always paying attention to hymns, and there are a few hymns I don't allow anyways. Um and or that there's a few modifications that we do too. So O Come Emmanuel is one of the ones that in Jewish Christian kind of interfaith work is a different version of that doesn't have the phrase ransom captive Israel. Um,
Hmm.
uh, so yeah, music is usually what I'm paying the most attention to. I mean, reading, so we have assigned readings, I don't get a say in them, but if there's something
Right.
to pay attention to in the preaching, to explain, or make sense of, um, that would be what I would pay most attention to. But
Yeah,
so there's some problematic hymns, like I will not
sure.
deny that. Um, there's a lot of problematic theology out there for sure.
Yeah, no, that comes through. No, that's true. That's interesting. You just think about it. So I remember, sometimes I'd be in visiting worship in another place, and I'd quickly scan the lyrics to a hymn before we were like, "Is this okay?" And I kind of join in on a little bit. So that's the
What are we asking everyone to sing here? I mean, like, it's probably a good exercise for Christians to be doing anyways. I think sometimes we start singing and like just completely disassociate from any of the words we're actually saying. Like, oh, it's a pretty song. And like we're singing about drinking the blood of the lamb or something. And I don't know. It's always great, like
It's no
having,
good. No more, no blood drinking.
I mean, sometimes it's just like, oh, is my 6 year old or is my 8 year old going to ask questions about this? What's this mean? It's like, what does it mean? Uh,
Mm,
so it's always just an interesting reflection of what's happening in our worship to have visitors who are going to hear with very different ears, to what we're doing and what we're saying. Um, I always see something new when I have a non-Christian in my space. So I'm going, why in the world did you do that? Um, so yeah, that has felt more fruitful than mudly interfaith, watered down Jesus worship.
right.
Um, I bet I'm curious. So Christians, I feel like it's sort of it's a little bit of like the kind of woke white woman response is like the good Christian response of being like, we want to do all this interfaith stuff and we want to have Jewish friends and we want to have like, we want to prove like we're good friends and allies. Like, is there a desire in the Jewish community for this interfaith work or um is I'm kind of curious about I know I hear it within my kind of congregational settings, but what is the desire or hope in the Jewish community that you
Interesting.
obviously can't speak for all of?
Wait, we get what?
Well, I get that you also can't speak for all of the Jewish
Oh
community.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, represent
That's
all of Judaism in
not
your
gonna stop me.
response,
That's not gonna stop me from.
please.
That's actually a great question, and I think that I've always found value in it because of uh well, a couple things. I mean, I think that what I want out of it is a sense of uh well, there's just that um level of being at the table, like being like especially being a minority faith tradition, to say no, we're here, we have a voice, and we're a part of this community, and as a way of uh, kind of educating people around Judaism, because I think there are notions, like maybe going back to those comments, right? There are notions about what Judaism is from a particular perspective, and then there's what Judaism is, for real. And so, like, that's a sort of a constant thing, and that's through that sharing. I think through that experience, like you just described, and it's not in the sense of like defensiveness, but just in the sense of no, let's actually learn about each other, and so we know what these are, and I value those opportunities where I could share, like when I talk about Judaism to Christian audiences or invited to churches, to kind of be, authentic in that way and to share what is Judaism from the perspective of Jews, in terms of that, in terms of, and then how it might be understood. And that's only valuable by the openness and willingness to engage. And I think too that there's uh, related to that. I think there's then the external work, right? The coalition building, that when we can find like-minded, I mean, we need to be allied on a whole number of issues, and we're seeing that especially now. And that requires us to kind of sort of join together with those shared values and to say, here, we're going to stand together. And that doesn't take the place for the education piece. I think, recognizing the difference. Um, and so I find value in that. And honestly, there's, if I'm going to be completely honest, I guess I should be completely honest, there's a sense of protection. That's like, I think that the sense of like, in this, to the extent that Jewish communities are sometimes targeted, to know that we have allies and that we are visible and that we have uh, friends and relationships, either between among clergy or among congregations, that, if something happens, that there are people who will be supportive of that. So I think that's another important part of it. Um, And I wondered, and yeah, I think and I've been thinking recently about, how could we then, take that to the next level? How could we have sort of maybe explore or dive into some more of those differences as well, and to sort of recognize them and honor them, and as opposed to just kind of being all together, or like say, focusing on the similarities. I think there can be value in both.
One of you talked about, the need for education about what Judaism is, right? And from the comments, and one of the places I notice a lot of need for education in the comments is often around like the history of interfaith dialogue, which most major Christian traditions have done some sort of like actual official work around. I mean, right, the Catholics started this in the 60s. The Episcopal Church has sort of official statements and doctrine around um, the validity of the Jewish people and the covenant with God, right? Like one dumb that we need to have like official statements about the validity of a religion that is not ours. But like in a post-Holocaust, post-Shoah world, like that was incredibly necessary.
Right.
And so the Catholic Church has done that, the Episcopal Church has done that, and I find that many people have zero education. So I'll have Christians, I did a video talking about why I don't like, I have a Jewish sister and I don't try to convert her to Christianity. And people are like, you are failing at your job. And I'm like, no, like we have covenants and understandings about this, and that spans denominations. And so that's a fascinating place for me, kind of as a Christian leader, where I think I need and we Christians need to do better, because our Christian followers are just kind of spewing ignorance on the internet, um, and it's an interesting history and peace that was supposed to lay a groundwork for interfaith work to be ongoing. Um, and it's been one of my frustrations, I think, and I haven't as engaged as deeply always in some of the Christian work that is pro-Palestine, even when I'm incredibly supportive of the suffering people of Gaza, because it's work that is very detached and devoid from the ongoing interfaith dialogue and work with the Jewish people that is and needed to be happening before October 7th and needs to be an underpinning and a current of how we advocate for suffering people. Um,
Mhm.
and so it feels like something that happened or this work has happened in church history, but has really fallen to the wayside in the last
Mhm.
10 years, 20 years. I don't know. I could just throw numbers at a wall.
Yeah, that's interesting. I had less familiarity with some of the history of interfaith dialogue. I mean, I just kind of, when I came out of seminary, it's been a little over 20 years for me, that it was just kind of natural. Like that's what you did, especially in a smaller town where I am. Um, you just, in fact, the history in our community was even prior, like 20 years before I got there. No, longer than that. Yeah, about 25 or 30 years. That it was the synagogue joining associated ministries that truly made it interfaith.
Mhm.
Like before, it was an ecumenical group, and there were some pioneers in the community here who really saw the value in making that connection. And they'd be interesting to talk to them about kind of what their motivations were. But yeah, I think that's interesting because I think it is. That's where been getting the sense, and maybe just recently. I mean, I haven't really been able to articulate it, but just this idea that there's real um, history there that I feel can't be ignored. At the same time, it's not like it brings us to a place of um, where it provides context, and I think that sometimes acknowledging that context is important. But I think things get fraught when you're referencing context, and then people read that as you're kind of advocating for a position per se. Especially as you raise uh, Israel, Gaza, where there's real history there, in terms of Jewish history, and again, and also this nuance of Jewish identity that is both faith-based but also peoplehood based and ethnicity based, and which is kind of a uniqueness to that as well. And just that there's this very long history that in a way contributed to where we are now. And again, I'm saying that not as a justification for anything, because I think we're very similar in terms of our shared um, horror at what's going on. And at the same time, from my perspective, uh, I feel a sense of loss when that's not being acknowledged. That there's a reason why we're here, and I don't know what that inner dialogue feels to me like an inner dialogue. It's not something I need per se, but I think it's just interesting. Uh, to know what that would look like.
Uh, yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. Like maybe it's something I feel like the world needs to know how to do. Like I feel like internally, like I understand or am working towards understanding that nuance. Um, I'm just thinking about I went to the Holy Lands a few years ago, and as we're talking as a group, as Christians, and just I mean, I go back to kind of it feels like the woke white woman who wants to be so good and kind of bleeding hearts for whoever's the most suffering person in the room, but also can feel very much like centering ourselves. And so the way in which kind of the Christian fight for suffering in the Holy Lands ends up really centering Christians in the conversation, or American Christians end up centering themselves, or at least in our group. I'm not saying that well at all, uh, but just a real lack of nuance or wrestling. With the harm Christianity in our language, especially like looking at the language of Christianity. If you don't look at any actions of Christians, but just the language that Christianity has had through our liturgies and our preaching, um, it absolutely it laid a path to the Holocaust. Like it is the part of the bricks that made that. Uh, and we know that because like the Catholic Church changed its Good Friday liturgy to change that. Did they fix it? No, but it's better than it was. Um, and I see some of that repetition happening now of kind of Christians just falling into this unexamined language
Oh,
that does a lot of harm in the long run. Um, And I see that in kind of the polarized language of pro-Palestine, anti-Israel, especially, and how that comes out.
yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's an interesting. I guess I'm less familiar with the intra-Christian dialogue around it, although obviously I had hints about it, and seen other creators, people talking about it and that. And yeah, it's an interesting. One thing I've been thinking of is yeah, and I don't want to. I think you're alluding to this, and you can answer this more, which is just like it's not even. It's like there's been overt, right? If you talk about anti-Semitism and whatnot, but there's also kind of latent, in the sense of uh, the what a Jewish person is, or what Jews are, and I've been thinking about that recently. Again, it's not. There's no changing the history. And so I don't want to say that, yes, I think I agree with you. I think that, again, from my perspective, it feels like that kind of laid the groundwork for where we are. And I mean, subsequently laid the ground after the Holocaust, laid the groundwork for Israel. Um, and that, where was I going with this? Oh, I forgot. But yeah, to the extent that it's like, yeah, I mean, I just wondering, like, it's not, maybe this is a question. It's something I've been thinking about, but maybe I'll just ask you. Like it strikes me there's a theme, and one of the ways I've approached it is like, um, and this kind of relates to the roots. I feel like the roots of anti-Semitism are really anti-Judaism, like within the church and doctrine and whatnot. And this feeling that it's not, I don't think, like for me, like anti-Semitism isn't just hatred of Jews, as it's sometimes translated, but it's the sense that Jews aren't supposed to exist,
Mm.
and um, that to me stems from what the understanding of, or limited understanding of theology, of this sense of like new covenant and whatnot, what the Jews are and how Jews are sometimes portrayed within the Gospels, and it's beyond just this. Oh well, yeah, we used to think the Jews killed Jesus, but now we're No, they didn't. Forget that.
No, they
They
did.
didn't.
No, but like a lot of Christian theology is built on the idea that Judaism failed. I mean, that for some Christians, that's just been the easiest path to Jesus, right? Like Jesus came because God spoke to Israel. I mean, this is supersessionism, right? Like Jesus came to supersede that covenant and is the
Sure.
full, and it's there's a few different sort of flavors to it, right? It's the messianic fulfillment. And let's pull out every reference to a Messiah that we have in the Old Testament and the proof text Jesus. There is Israel, Judaism failed over and over, broken, flawed people, so Jesus came to fix it all. Um, uh, so different variations of that. So I think for Christians who and this goes beyond just Judaism too, right? Because it becomes the uniqueness of Jesus and salvation, and then you really have to start thinking about like our under how hell has been used as a tool um, to entice belief, right? Like if
Mhm.
you're gonna burn in hell if you don't follow Jesus. Like I get a lot of that video about me and my sister, a lot of comments about like, aren't you worried about her going to hell? Um, and I'm like, so like for a lot of like that's just an integral part of how they have the framework for understanding the universe.
Right.
And so everyone of other beliefs is at risk, right? And Christianity has a pretty negative history of you know, trying to convert people. The Crusades were not our best moment. But it makes it like if you think it's like a universe, like eternal life or death situation, like that's the underpinning, and that's much more in the evangelical church. Uh,
Sure. Oh, but it's interesting to the extent that, at least I'm familiar with like how some of that has just kind of become part of common parlance, right? I mean, it's sort of so I'm familiar with that aspects of it, even though it's not part of my theology, but it's just kind of, it becomes part of popular understanding. So I'm sure even people who aren't, you know, religious or uh, have a sense of have notions of heaven and hell and just this idea of afterlife. So it's
Well, and especially like the Anglo-Saxon culture that got
right,
imbued into America. And so I think that's where a lot of anti-Jewish, anti-Muslim sentiment gets justified, is well, I'm trying to save your eternal life. Um, and it's how subliminal language creeps into our liturgies. So, for example, on Good Friday, it used to be much more blatant, where it said something like, we pray for our fallen Jewish siblings that they may find the light of Christ. Like that was the language people were praying during the service. Um, and people didn't question it. And still, like I will look at liturgies and prayers with parishioners and talk about, why we might change the words here because this is, not great for non-Christians. And but there's going to be a piece of that too, right? Like you can't totally reconcile the uniqueness of Jesus and Christianity. Like all of our faiths are going to contradict each other. But
sure, sure,
But the problem is when the Christian contradiction leads to lots of people getting killed, right? Like when our preaching and teaching in language leads to death, that's where we have to examine our practices. Right? Because that's not happening with other religions' contradictions.
right. Well, I mean, any religion, any ideology has that could have that tendency, right? Um,
Sure, they could, but yeah, so that's where I get on, my high horse with Christians about, the interfaith work. Um, And it feels harder now because also, I mean, maybe this is my question for you because you talked at the beginning about safety, right? Like congregational safety, having allies. Like, I do Christian communities inherently feel unsafe for Jewish communities? Um, you know,
Uh, No, no, I don't feel that. I mean, well, I'll say this. I think that focused in, well, maybe yes or no. So it's like I mean, I know the people I work with, right? And I trust the people that I'm in a relationship with, and I think that, again, this conversation, I reached out to because I felt that we could have these conversations. It's like that that I guess my point, it comes from like, well, what are, like when I let me backtrack. Edit that out. No, I don't know. We don't have an editor, so we're just figuring this out. But the to the extent that I'm always on, thinking about it and sort of wary about where we. But again, like I really value relationship building in terms of as the point. Like if we can build relationship, and I know you and or you the other person, and you know me, and we're both people and with families and concerns and whatnot, then like okay, that's the basis, and then we can sort of dive into some of that, and then I could share some of this, and you could share some of that, and we can build on that because I'm seen as a real person, and I see the other person as a real person, as a whole person. And so, in that way, it's like that's part of that, and and it sort of alleviates that concern because I mean, I really appreciate the things that you've shared, and part of it is like, well, I wonder, like, are they, what is going, like, what are the congregations doing, or how are they approaching it? Did they change this thing? And granted, like I'm very forgiving in the sense of yes, that's your liturgy. I understand that. Like I know even from within our, liturgical change is difficult. And it's also like there's that balance between do you just change do you need to change the liturgy or can you change your intention behind it and maintain that liturgy? And that's a constant question. And we have that. And so I recognize that and don't like feel like I need, the church to do X, Y, and Z. And at the same time, I wonder, like, well, are they like, what are they thinking? Like when, um, when they're, or how is it being approached when the, reading the Gospels about the Pharisees and their hypocritical ways, and like, do people kind of make that connection, or like, how is the priest or the pastor engaging with that? What are the people hearing when they hear that? How does it become manifest? Is it internalized? Is it deconstructed to use a term that I
well,
know they hear.
exactly.
And so but not knowing that, like, just makes it so it doesn't feel unsafe. I just sort of feel curious about that, and I think that is. I mean, I've in my experience, even people who aren't familiar or haven't really kind of understood when I've shared about, oh yeah, here's an approach, or here's how Judaism sees this, or this is how Judaism sees itself versus how you might see Judaism through your understanding of Christianity or the Old Testament, then people have been open to that because I think that there's also a basis of trust in doing that. So, because I don't feel like any of us should be in a position to say like, well, your theology is bad, but to ask like, well, how do you engage with that theology? Because we all have our struggles internally with our inherited traditions, and I guess I feel more comfortable when people are, open and honest about that, as opposed to,
Well, I'm really glad we're doing this.
yeah, me too. Wow, this is a good. We should like invite our viewer to no, just kidding, our viewers to sort of send in
Give us more
topics that they might
topics.
want us to talk about.
If we did more of this, if these two heretics, as we were named in our comments, did more of this, what would you
Yeah,
want?
that should be our thing. The two heretics.
All right. Thanks for listening, friends.